So here we have a manual car, and I'm going to show you how to take off the shroud, radiator shroud, so we can check the pads and discs for wear. This doesn't have to be done that often, but of course you have to do it every now and again. This being a manual car, also I'll show you that the bleed nipples on the brake calipers, which you need should you need to bleed the brakes. So start off by removing the spare wheel. And in this car, we have steering headlights, but we don't have self-leveling headlights in this particular car. The headlights are fixed. And as you can see, you've got a trunnion here with a plastic lock nut. So if you assume that the lights are set in the right directions, you want to leave the lock nut where it is and unscrew the trunnion such that this keyhole slot is free of the bolt underneath it, and you can then unclip the cable and put that away. You can do the same on the other side, keeping the lock nut in place and unscrewing the trunnion until the keyhole slot is clear of the bolt, allowing you to pull out the cable. Then it's just disconnecting the spring, which can remain in place, and then you have this little Z-shaped piece which is easily lost, so keep that spare, and then the link to the steering arm just pops off. A final couple of things: you need to take out the wheel brace, which is fitted at the bottom, and then disconnect the spare wheel strap, which is fitted to the front of the bumper. Now we can undo all the bolts. There will be 8mm M5s on either side. And there are also M5s where the shroud is fitted to the radiator. Okay, and now with my long extension on my little socket set, undo the bolts holding the shroud to the radiator. It's very useful to have a very long extension to do this job, because it's very awkward otherwise. Now you only need to take off the bolts completely on this left side, because on the right side of the radiator there are slots in the shroud covering which will allow the shroud just to move out of the way, so you don't have to take the bolts right out. Removing the bottom screws of the shroud. Like so. And now all I need to do is to displace the side of the shroud out of the screws and lift the whole thing out and away. This then exposes the brakes, and we can now see what our brakes are like. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at the thickness of the pad material, and we can also look at the discs. A good way of working out how thin your pads are is by how much you can see the pistons behind the pads here. So these are about half worn, plenty of meat still on them, and the disc is new. When it's new, it's 12 millimeters thick, and Citroen's recommended minimum thickness is 10.5. So you can generally see if it's worn too much, but if you can get something down there to measure it, those are the thicknesses you need to look at. As this is a manual car, we have a separate bleed nipple down here, and the equivalent is on the other caliper, both of which you'll need to crack off and bleed through should you be bleeding the brakes. We'll look at the other side now. So here we have the bleed nipple on this side. What we're looking for is evenness of wear of the brake pads on all four, and hopefully they'll all be the same. As I say, these are about half worn. You can see how far the piston is sticking out, how much gap and how much material you've got. Very easy to see on a Citroen DS once you've taken the shroud off. That's all there is to see here. There's no other untoward issues. So we'll now go and put the shroud back on. So we're now going to refit the shroud, and a little tip is that the washers on the bolts on this side of the radiator, you just pull them out so that it makes it easier for you to slot the shroud back in, because your hands will be otherwise occupied. So with the shroud, lower it down into position, tucking the bottom under its legs and getting the sides into the bolt fixings like that. On the other side, just get the bolts in started. You don't have to tighten them up yet, but as long as they're in place, and it will hold the shroud in position. So as usual, when you're fitting an assembly which has multiple bolts, the best practice is to put them all in loose and then tighten them all up right at the end. That way you won't find that you have to slacken them off when you can't get something to align, which normally happens. So just fitting everything into place one at a time. If you were doing this having taken the wing off, you might find that you'd have to reset the bolts either side, which are in, although they're in captive slots, they can move slightly. And so in order to get the thing to fit perfectly, again, you might slacken them off and get everything loose before you tighten it up. So that is everything in place. And I can now tighten each one up. And once again, the use of the long extension under the bar makes the job easier. And the same on the other side. Finally, the screws at the bottom. Which are into spire clips. That one is loose. And then we have the spare wheel strap, which has to be clipped into the bumper support at the front using a pair of pliers. So this is connecting the steering linkage to the steering headlights, and the little Z-shaped piece which goes to the spring. And now we connect the cables to either side, screwing them back to the lock nuts that we haven't moved, because that's what we set in previously, meaning that the setting will not be lost and we don't have to spend a load of time resetting our steering headlights. Finally, once this is all done, like that, we then put in the wheel brace. It fits into its secure place under there, and now the spare wheel can go back on, held in place with its strap. And that's the job completed.